just for full disclosure, as someone who has consumed a lot of media, has worked for media in a certain aspect, and views media in certain ways, and especially documentaries. I love documentaries, and I've actually kind of debated on whether or not I'd like to try to make a documentary myself one day. Not about me, just about some interesting things that I've seen and experienced. But the one thing about a documentary, and I just want to make sure that anyone listening to this understands, you can frame a documentary to look however you want it to look.
Mm-hmm.
You can frame a documentary to paint a picture however you want it to be painted. And it's just a perspective that has a big picture overall. That's not in any way trying to justify anything. But we know that if we were going to make a documentary and our names is, 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson, and we want to make a documentary to make P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, Diddy, Papa Diddy Pop look poor, look like a bad guy, look like a villain, it's absolutely something that's not that hard to do, especially with all the facts and everything that we have now. So just something to keep in mind. I can't dispute anything that was made in that documentary, but also just understand that when you're watching it, that you're watching someone else paint a picture of someone else's life, and that's kind of the best disclosure that I can add to it.
No Diddy, I'm going in. No Diddy, I'm thicky thick, so thicky. I'm going in, no Diddy. I'm going in, no Diddy. I'm going in, no Diddy.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Fanatically Speaking. I am Kent, the co-host and promoter.
I am Logoff, the Logoff legend, the hater of all social media. I'm the co-host and producer of the show. And today we're going to do something a little different. I've told Kent for years, I'm late to everything. So usually when something new happens or something comes out, I'm usually one of the last people to hear or consume whatever it is, whether it's music, whether it's a movie. And in this case, it's a documentary. So this documentary, it's pretty popular. It's all over Netflix, produced by 50 Cent. It's Sean Combs' The Reckoning. These episodes are going to be all spoilers, guys. Everything we're going to say is a spoiler.
Yeah.
So if this is something that you haven't watched, if this is something that you intend on watching, we're going to give you some perspective on it. And maybe you'll feel comfortable watching it on your own if you haven't. But just know, we're absolutely going to spoil this in every single episode that we record about this. If you go on social media, I'm sure people are spoiling it for you anyway. But I'm not on social media. This is just our perspective on it. But just know, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers all day long.
Yes.
And when I caught wind of it, I ended up watching the first episode of it. And I reached out to Kent, and I'm like, I think this will be something good for us to cover on the podcast. It's a 4-part documentary that's broken down into 4 different segments, just kind of going over Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff, a.k.a. Puffy, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, a.k.a. Diddy.
Papa Diddy.
And
Papa
it just kind of gives a full P. Diddy, Papa Diddy Pop. It's a full breakdown of from what I've seen thus far, his life and just the trajectory of him from starting off as a young man, up until, what we know him as today, someone who's sitting in prison. So that's kind of a good lead in for it. Our last movie episodes have done pretty well. This is something that's really topical, that's really popular. And I found it really interesting. There was a lot of things in here that I did not know. And there were some things that I knew that it just kind of, refreshed my memory on. But just kind of as a whole for you, Kent, before we kind of get started, what were your thoughts on it?
On the first episode or the...
Well, just the documentary as a whole, like what, I guess, was it just me? Was it just me saying, hey, man, I think you should take a look at this? That kind of, or had you heard about it before I mentioned it?
Yeah, so I'd heard some buzz. And it's funny that after you mentioned it, then I'm hearing it from other people. Like, oh, so-and-so said it was pretty good, especially get into the next episode, this, that, and the other. And I never know about documentaries, especially when they come out like so quickly. Because like you said, Diddy is in prison. It just happened.
Yes.
So it's kind of like, okay, is there enough information? Like who did it? So I had not really looked into who did it. So then you find out, 50 Cent is, behind the documentary, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
That he, because as you know, if you know about the documentary, like we said, Diddy recorded himself last year. He had a videographer kind of do some video and leading up to before he got arrested.
Yes, and I think that's probably one of the most riveting things about it that makes this documentary land is the fact that they've got footage from last year.
Yeah.
Of before he actually gets arrested and put in handcuffs, and it leads into kind of what his mind state was before he actually got arrested. I think the investigations and everything were kind of pending, but he hadn't been taken into custody. So the linchpin in all this is having that footage, which is incredible to get to begin with. You got his actual footage of him on the phone, in the very beginning of the documentary, speaking to his attorneys, and we can dive into that in a little bit. But that's how things kind of start.
Yeah.
And for him to be able to do this and say, you know what, I'm going to take this and then frame an entire documentary around this popular figure who's been popular for almost 30 years now it's incredible. I've got some criticisms for it, but I'm going to wait until we kind of get a chance to elaborate a little bit more. But it's up to you. I'm one of these people, I hate spoilers. Some people don't care. They can consume anything and then go watch it. I'm not one of those guys.
Yeah, and again, I think it, like you said, it's kind of ironic though. Well, not ironic, but it's kind of funny to me that 50 Cent went out and bought these, bought the tapes, the footage, and I don't think Diddy intended for him to get his hands on it and do a documentary.
No, not at all.
So that's
no, not at all.
So that's hilarious.
And by the way, it is hilarious, and we know 50 is petty. And the interesting thing about this to me is I haven't seen, and maybe you have, I haven't seen any record of where he actually paid for this footage. It just says he obtained it. I don't know how he got it.
Well, again, we don't know what's true and what's sometimes on the internet. So I did read that he purchased the footage.
Got it. That's good to know. That's good insight to have.
Which would make sense. That videographer, he was doing it with Diddy, for Diddy, and then probably wasn't supposed to get out, and then 50 Cent was like, hey, but I'll pay you this. And he's like, oh, okay.
Got it.
I mean, business is business. And but yeah, like you said, we're gonna look into this, and like you said, people may have other takes. I mean, I know why we learned something that we didn't know, and we lived through the 90s. So
yeah, the 90s, the 90s hip hop scene, the bad boy era, it was massive. Like, it's a major part of my childhood, and there was absolutely some nostalgic moments in there for me. It was like, oh my gosh, like it takes me back to a certain moment. And so we're going to start this off with episode 1. The name of the episode is called Pain versus Love. And just for clarification for you, Kent, I watched this with my wife and my daughter.
Okay.
They insisted on watching this. So we actually sat and watched this as a family. My daughter's a high schooler. Some of the subject matter was a little touchy, but she'd already heard a lot of this stuff anyway over the past year from, the kids at school. So the documentary starts off with a scene in Diddy in a hotel room on the phone with his attorneys. And this is, I believe it was like 6 days before he's actually taken into custody. And he's in this, this dope ass New York luxury suite. And he's on the phone with the lawyers. And one of the quotes I wrote down was that he says, "We are losing." And he says, "I'm spending millions and they're still coming." Meaning that he was trying to shift the narrative on what the public perception of his image was in this case. He mentions that, that he's trying to, he wants to clean things up. And what it does is it implies that he's trying to, kind of manage the fallout, get a better public PR spin on it. And he's frustrated with his attorneys about trying to to reach the masses on the internet to try to change the story and the trajectory of how things are going, because right now the walls are kind of closing in on him. How'd you feel about that part of it?
Yeah, he's trying to save himself, right? I mean, it's not about anything else, and you'll learn this obviously through the documentary. Diddy is definitely about himself. So it was funny because, again, at this point as well, I believe the video had been released with Cassie, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
at this point, like, I don't know what he thought or what he thought his lawyer could do, because once there's video footage of you doing something, then public opinion is out there, and as bad as that video was, it's almost like, yeah, so I see it, so I know it, and I believe it. So anything else that I hear, I'm gonna then probably believe as well, because if you can do this, then you're probably guilty of doing these other things that you're being accused of. But yeah.
And that's an assumption that I think I don't want to be speaking generalities, but I think that's an assumption that most people would make,
Yeah.
Kent. So I get what you mean.
I mean, in public, like I said, public opinion, when
Yes.
not the court system, not the jury, it was public opinion. When you see something, then your mind shifts a certain way. If you don't see it, then you're like, well, I don't know, it's a he said, she said, this, that, and the other. But when you see that video, and that's not a part of the documentary. It is, but not in this part. But that's what I thought of was, you're trying to save yourself, and you're mad and you're angry because it was backing up against him. And like you said, he's losing, and it's not just I'm losing, but I'm losing my image. I'm losing my life. I'm losing everything based on all of these allegations.
Yeah, and in that scene specifically, I think his frustration was with his attorneys, where he's telling them, like, I need you guys to go do more. I don't care what you do. I don't care how you do it. You go figure it out. That's what I'm paying you people for.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I've a terrible thing to say on record, but I kind of understand where he's coming from with that. Where, I mean, if you're him and someone's taking on a case of this magnitude, the expectation is that they understand who he is as a celebrity, and that everything needs to be on the table as an option when you're accepting his millions of dollars of money to represent him. He wants you to go out there and be the bulletproof vest and take the shit. I don't even know what these attorneys look like. We know that Diddy, and it's shown throughout the documentary, that he likes to have control. And this was him trying to say, hey, like, I don't care what it takes, just go get it done. And, didn't really look too great as the documentary progressed, but things move into the kind of the second scene. It kind of goes into his childhood, and it rewinds back to, him as a young boy growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, which is a place that, I'm somewhat familiar with. And, it talks about, his relationship with his mom. It talks about his father, Melvin Combs, who was murdered. And it goes into kind of an interesting past about his dad, where they imply that his dad was this hustler, street guy, drugs, and kind of, well respected within the street culture. He's murdered when Puff is at a young age, and as a result, he's raised by his mother. And there were family friends, and there's actually a gentleman in the documentary who actually lived I think he lived on the bottom floor underneath Puffy. Apparently his parents had a home where, there was a dual home where another family could live, like a duplex of some sort. And so they grew up together as young men. And he described, how he was, for the most part, a soft kid. And, he wasn't a street tough guy, but he was tough when it came to being a fighter. He was a dirty fighter. He would do whatever it took to win, to get his way. I mean, and there were some examples that he made, in the documentary, where he's like, no, he's going to go all out because he can't go back home and tell his mom that he lost that fight. Yeah. So from that aspect, was there anything in that second scene that kind of stood out to you?
Nah, I mean, they talked about his mom raised him, and like you say, yeah, he fought dirty, biting, scratching, clawing, whatever he had to do to win a fight. It wasn't like he was this big guy either. So, as a kid, he wasn't huge. So, I mean, you can only imagine, what he's trying to go through. He probably got picked on a little bit and, fighting his way out of it like some kids do. So, he just had that kind of upbringing where, he had to he didn't have the father figure. So he's, out here scratching and clawing. Like I said, he wasn't putting it.
Yeah, trying to find his way.
He wasn't putting his fist up, fighting like I don't know what you say, like a man or however you want to call it. But, he was just like, I'm going to fight and I'm going to do, again, whatever it takes.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was one thing that was glaring to me when it shifted to that scene was his childhood friend. And he said he used an example of the discipline within the household from Diddy's mother. And he said, when I was a young man, I got whippings, I got beatings. He was like, I didn't get beatings like Diddy did. Right. And and apparently this is someone who has, just kind of an experience. And the interesting thing, and I don't know if you caught this, he actually said, he's like, after he says it, he's like, wow, man, I don't even like having to think about that. Mm-hmm. Like when he said it out loud, he kind of grimaced and he was thinking like, damn, like it was such a dark thing for him to remember. Just the kind of the beatings and the discipline that took place within the Combs household that he didn't even want to think about it. So, obviously there's some trauma that could be extended from that. I'm a young man who got beatings. I feel like every single ass whooping I got as a child was deserved because I was wilding. But obviously there's a limit and, people are different. Some people take discipline in different ways. And, ultimately it does kind of shape the type of person that you evolve into, especially as a young man without having, a masculine father figure representation within your household.
Yeah. And again, different time, different era. You can only imagine the stress of a single mom raising, we've heard these stories, right?
A young black boy in Mount Vernon, New York.
So, no excuses for anybody. I'm not condoning anything. I'm just saying that if we're looking at it, we're dissecting it, then we're going to say, hey, she might have let out some stress on him, But again, I know people who are in those similar situations and they didn't do that. So, but that's just, again, like you said, that's his childhood friend's memory. And it was pretty ingrained in his brain. Like we all have those childhood memories. And like you said, I remember beatings and I remember the bad ones. And, like you said, but nothing like this. Obviously, it was just that this was someone from the outside and what he had to hear or see, it still bothers him to this day. So it was probably pretty bad. And again, like I said, everything in life shapes you. So this was just something else for Diddy. And there you go. Yeah,
no, I'm with you. And then it shifts to him as a young man going up through adolescence, and it lands on him going to Howard. So he attends Howard University, and while on campus, he becomes just kind of a campus celebrity in a lot of ways, promoting parties, and they had some interviews with some of the students, and they were talking about how he was electrifying, he was exhausting, he was obsessed with just kind of being seen as an important figure on campus, and just kind of trying to make himself look bigger than what he actually was. And, again, that's another theme that continues throughout. But, the origin story, we all kind of hear about, people at the end result, they talk about their successes, but to hear other people talk about him within that Howard era was a little jarring for me, because you kind of saw him as a young teenage man. And for me, I'd never seen him like that. I'd always seen him as, bad boy clinking the
Yeah.
bottles in the Biggie videos. So to kind of see him in like backstage campus footage of him, just trying to be the life of the party and be the guy that everyone liked and admired and the popular guy was a little bit something for me. How'd you see it?
Yeah, the same. And then you go back to, I don't know if we skipped this, but they talked about his mom having parties, right, at their
Yes.
place. So again, that inspired him, right? And then, like you said, then he was trying to be the life of the party, throwing parties, and again, it goes back to why was he looking for that? Why was he trying to be that? Again, did he hear stories about his dad? Was he trying to be like him, a larger than life figure? Was it away from, like you said, all the fights that he went through as a kid? Maybe was he shifting that to, trying to be then popular and, again, like I said, the life of the party. And then again, Diddy had a look about him, I'm not going to say Diddy's a handsome guy, but, so he's not overcompensating, but he's trying to, I think, create an image and create something that he's not, but become something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And that's something that a lot of, young men do. Like they don't really have an identity. And, I'm not going to empathize with Diddy, but this is something that young men experience where it's like, well, who am I really? Who is it that I want to be? Which actually leads to just kind of the next step in this, in the documentary, which is where he wanted to move into the music industry. And at that time, I believe they said that there were, pretty much 2 venues for you to get through in the music scene in that New York area at that time. And one was Russell Simmons and the other was Andre Harrell. And they said how apparently, with some of the connections at Howard, that Diddy would go to Heavy D, who was in partnerships with Andre Harrell, and knock on his door every day, asking for him to make an introduction, just so that he could get in the room with him. And it actually led to him getting an internship with Andre Harrell, and he ended up dropped out of college to go and join as an internship with Andre Harrell. And so that shifts to the next scene, where he's there, with Uptown Records. And Andre Harrell tells a great story about just kind of how hardworking Diddy was and how he asked him to go. I think he asked him to go and get some tapes, from the store that was some blocks away. And apparently Diddy got back incredibly fast. And he's like, how did you get these so fast? He's like, well, I ran the whole time. And he used that as an example of, like, even from day one, he was a hard worker. He was somebody who wanted to prove himself. He was someone that wanted to legitimize himself. Like, no, I have a value. You want me here. These are the things that I'm willing to do. I am willing to go all out, even if it's something as simple as just go get me some cassette tapes. Here's how I'm going to go do it. And, there were some interviews with some of the staff that worked at Uptown where they described him as a kind of a once in a generation type of scout, because he was so ambitious and he wanted to see himself in such a manner. What were your thoughts on that aspect?
Yeah, very. This was a time, like you say, you got to be impressed with him at that age and how hardworking he was and motivated. So you can see how he made it to what he became, right? In life, different reasons, but again, the work ethic and the drive and the motivation at a young age has to be respected, and you're impressed with that. He had I don't know if he knew where he wanted to be, but he knew he wanted to get in, like I said, get in the door, and then, then take the steps up, right? Work your way up, and he definitely did that as an intern.
Yes. Yeah. And then so he ends up, and there was actually, I think it was an interview that they played within the documentary where Puff talks about how, I keep calling him Puff. I'm going to go back from calling him Puff, calling him,
he was Puff at the time.
P. Diddy.
Puff Daddy.
Yeah. He was Puff at the time. Puff, Puffy, Puff Daddy. But even the name in itself is trying to imply that he was bigger than what he was. That's, just putting everything together. But, he spoke about how, he went and he actually took Andre Harrell out to lunch and said, "Hey, I want you to make me an A&R. I want you to make me someone that, has a relationship with these artists. I feel like that would be a good job for me." And, he gets promoted to an A&R. And one of the first responsibilities that he has is he's assigned to be the A&R for newly discovered Jodeci, the R&B group from that time. And, Andre Harrell's kind of giving him the game, saying, "Hey, here's how you do this. You need to understand that you are the most important person, not the artist. That if anything is going on, you need to be involved. You need to have that type of control, because you're the person who are navigating what takes place for us as a record company. It's not about the artist, it's about us." And that kind of goes to show the type of, mentality that Puff would have throughout his entire music career, where it's like, no, we're the show. Like, we're the people putting things together. We're the people putting together these concerts. We're doing these studio sessions for you. We're doing the producing. We're doing these collabs. And it's just an interesting dynamic that, he was looking for that father figure all along. And, he comes along in the form of a powerful record executive in Andre Harrell.
Yeah. Again, motivated to do something else. And he knew what he wanted to do. And again, like you say, once he got with Jodeci, he gave them the image that we saw on the music videos, right? They had the talent for the singing, correct, all that. He gave them the, "Hey, here's what I want you to look like. Here's what I want you to do. Here's I want you to present it," right? And again, he had that power. And then I don't want to skip too far ahead, but then of course, he moved on to Mary J. Blige, and did this.
Oh no, not too far ahead at all. No, Mary J. Blige.
He went right in.
I feel like there's someone else we're missing.
And
too.
That was the, like they said, the first kind of female that no one was really putting out females at that point in hip hop to correct, that level. And again, they also had a certain beat, a certain sound, and that was all Puff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they gave him a lot of credit for understanding, and I think a lot of this comes from the genesis of, like you talked about, parties and, hosting parties at Howard and understanding what gets crowds going. He was always big on having crowds understand and appreciate what it is they're listening to, vibing and having a good time. He had a really good ear for it. The success that he had early wasn't an accident. He put the time in, and that was actually implied throughout the documentary as well, where it's like, no, like he was somebody who did the work. Yeah, he might have been an asshole, but he understood what it was. He didn't have the talent for it, but he had a good ear. And sometimes, especially as a record executive, those are the things that you need. And, clearly at Uptown, those are things that they saw in him and allowed him to kind of flourish with. So he ends up, getting promoted higher up within Uptown, and he butts heads with people. There's a lot of yelling. He would humiliate people publicly. He would kind of go past the personal, boundaries that people had, and, wanting to date such and such as girl. I think there was the story about him wanting to date Albie Shore's girlfriend at the time.
Yeah, and that was actually Kim Porter.
Yeah,
so
yes.
She worked the front desk
and
at Uptown, and so he was at the time. Yeah, they were talking about how even though Albie Shore at the time he was a star, you know what I mean, and Puffy didn't care. Like I said, he wanted to say, well, I could say that I took his girl or his ex-girl or side girl, whatever, and he was just like that. He wanted to be the man, and like you said, he got promoted and some infighting. But yeah, like I said, worked his way up, and again, maybe he always had that mindset of something bigger. You know what I mean? And I think also he was, you called him an asshole, but I don't know that he had become that yet. I think he had kind of been fun-loving Puffy, party-throwing Puffy. Again, but then as a lot of people do with more power, you kind of change, right? And then I think he maybe started to realize that maybe he was bigger and should be kind of doing more.
Or could be bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the contention within the office, him trying to be bigger, more bodacious. No, I'm the guy, I'm the man. And it's an interesting thing because I remember years ago where there were stories about, him at Uptown when he would just show up at the office not wearing a shirt. And then, this stuff has been out since the early 2000s. Diddy would Puff would just show up at the studio not wearing jeans, Timbs, no shirt, and a chain and sunglasses, and just walk into meetings. And I'm saying? That was how he did things. So, and then obviously that moves into the next segment. Moves into the part where, Andre Harrell starts to see kind of some of the uncontrollable unpredictability of Diddy as an executive, even though he's had massive success and he's been working great with these artists and he's doing a great job and he's making a lot of money for Uptown. And, Andre Harrell is just like, yeah, man, I'm sorry, dude. I got to let you go. I have to. I don't really have much of a choice, and again, this is the tenacity that somebody like Sean Combs has, where he took that, he could have used that as an opportunity to be defeated, but he used it as an opportunity to go and do his own thing. There are a lot of people who would have just tried to run to another record company, but he's like, you know what? No, I'm going to see what I can do to put some pieces together and see if I can come up with some things on my own.
Yeah, and he'd always been that way, right? I mean, he's going to take everything he learned at Uptown, and he was the mindset of, okay, I've already learned this. Let me take it to that. And then take it and see what I can do with it to build my own brand.
Yes. No, absolutely. And so, so then obviously that's the early stages. They talk about him trying to secure funding, from other record executives. So that way he can kind of launch his own label and secure his own artist. And, one of the bigger, probably most important things in Bad Boy's career, in throughout the growth of Bad Boy as a whole, was before he ended up leaving Uptown or getting let go from Uptown Records, Diddy, Andre Harrell said, listen, man, I'm going to let you go. But at the time, they had just brought in Biggie, Notorious B.I.G. They just brought him in as an artist, and he had a very slow start. But he's like, you know what? I'm going to let you go, but you could take Biggie with you as an artist. Apparently Puff had done the legwork. He did whatever he needed to do to secure Big and get everything up off the ground. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to let you take him with you. We'll release him from Uptown and you guys can just go do your thing, but you got to get the hell out of here. And so this was early in Biggie's career. He didn't start off hot. It was a really slow start for him, as an artist, creating, the mixtapes and demos and stuff. He just hadn't popped yet. And, there was kind of a dive into kind of the early Bad Boy atmosphere where, it shows them throwing a lot of parties. Again, there's a theme here. Throwing parties, Puff dancing, guy on the microphone, wearing the hat. And this was before he actually was able to kind of take Bad Boy to the level where it was seen as legitimate. And that leads into something that I know you wanted to get to, which was the CCNY basketball game tragedy, which was a massive story, specifically in New York, just kind of how horrific everything went. And there was so much footage. But I got a question for you, Kent. How much of this did you remember?
I'm going to be honest. I had no idea about this basketball game.
It was a big deal, man. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea. So I missed it growing up. I was probably like 10 years old. Yeah. So, that and like you said, this was before he was Bad Boy and Puff Daddy that we knew, that really got on the scene.
It was in 1991. Yes, it was in 91. So this is pre what we were introduced to as Bad Boy as a record label and brand. This was before all of that, and this was along the same lines of them throwing parties and having events, and Heavy D was heavily involved in some of the planning for the CCNY basketball game, but this was mainly put on Puff. Like, this was his event. It was a celebrity basketball game, like a charity game, at City College. And, he was, a promoter. And as the documentary, unfolds, it describes that the event was massively oversold.
Yeah.
They sold too many tickets at a very low price. It was, supposed to be really affordable, which is what they wanted. But the event was only supposed to hold 2,500 people, and over 6,000 people showed up. So do you want to get into some of those details? I don't want to take too much of your steam.
No, I mean, I was just going to talk about it because that, as the documentary said, that kind of put him on the map and famous because the story was out there. And like you said, we missed it. I wasn't watching the news at 10 years old. So, again, he was kind of a no-name at the time. But behind the scenes, like you said, promoting these parties, throwing this, now he was doing this, basketball game. So, ultimately, though, like 9 people died. They got trampled because they, kind of bum rushed the doors. People didn't want to pay, so they wanted to just sneak in without paying. And then it led to an area where, it just couldn't hold the people and people got trampled and the game never happened.
Yeah,
and
it was a.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it was a stairwell.
Yeah.
So there were fixed entrances and New York buildings they're built, the architecture is built in a specific way, but at this particular venue there was no crowd control to begin with. They had very little planning of how they were going to secure the building as a whole. They didn't even have security to be able to handle a crowd of that size. But when people found out that the venue was sold out, they just started pushing their way through. Yeah. And then it ended up pushing their way through down some stairs. And when security realized that there were too many people trying to get in, they just locked the doors. But the stairwell was so pretty much like stuffed. Mm-hmm. So the people who were at the bottom of that stairwell literally got trampled to death. And I mean, the footage is horrific, man. Like, there's literally them carrying dead bodies of people who have been trampled by hundreds, if not thousands of people to death, just trying to escape this building because they wanted to see a charity basketball game. The footage was kind of eerie because I remember hearing some of it, but I'd never seen any of it. And this is, early 90s grainy footage of Dougie Fresh and Heavy D and Sean Combs. There's actually had video footage of Puff literally walking around the venue. I mean, he looked like he was in shock. Like, what the hell just happened? Like, what did I just do? Look at on a basketball court that's supposed to be this joyous event that's going to raise money for charity, and it ended in a complete tragedy. And I'll give credit where it's deserved. He had a press conference and he went out and said all the right things. He was able to kind of escape that situation without facing any serious charges. Yeah. But like you said, that's kind of his introduction into the world where his name is associated with something that big, even though it was the result of the death of 9 innocent people who weren't expecting to lose their lives that day. No, kind of crazy actually. Like I said, one that he came out unscathed. I think he blamed the cops, and they said they didn't do enough. And again, he just continued to rise. At the levels at Uptown after this. It's kind of amazing, really. That again. Yeah, super amazing. Yeah. And and it's like you said, so 9 people passed away as a result of this, and probably one of the more jarring things about that part of the documentary was that I think ultimately at the end there was really no person held accountable. It was finger pointing and blaming, and I do believe genuinely that it was just a terrible accident that happened, but it was an accident as a result of poor planning, terrible structure, cheap ticket prices, too much of a crowd, and he hyped it up so big to where more people wanted to come than could even be held within that venue as a whole. So, I don't know. I had mixed feelings about it. It felt bad. It was horrible. And, even in that part of the documentary, I'm watching it with my family. We actually paused it and had some discussions about these types of things. I have some fears when it comes to being in large crowds anyway. Yeah. And I don't know what I would have done in that situation. At that point, people just kind of panicked. But you're watching them literally carry people who've been trampled. 911 calls of, hey, we've got dead people here. We need to get, we need ambulances here. We need police here immediately. It was a sad situation, and ultimately that's something that he was able to use to his advantage to launch his career, which, again, not to get too far ahead, is something that seems to be a theme within his life. And, I'm pretty sure, we'll get to that as well.
Yeah. I gave him a little, slack back then too, because he was younger, and planning that basketball game a little different than planning a party. And again, when you have celebrities that are going to be there, it's like, of course, people are going to want to be there. And it turned, like you said, it turned out worse, and it's kind of, I guess, who do you blame? And at the time, thank God, he's very lucky there was no internet back then, and there was only news and local news and things like that. But yeah, I give him a little slack that he was young, and it was like early in his days of planning things like this, and just an unfortunate situation. But yeah, again, I'm still shocked that no one was held accountable.
Yeah, like you said, different time, different era. I do believe that, no one, I don't think anyone involved expected something like that to happen. And like I said, the footage of him walking around in that suit, on the floor with bodies strewn about and people panicking, not knowing what to do. There's no leadership. There's no direction. It's just like, you're just stuck in the middle of this thing in New York of all places. And, he's at the center of it. And, I can't imagine being a family member having something like that happen. And it's like, oh, well, it just happened and they lost their life, and, you're scarred forever, and there's no one to kind of hold the responsibility. But that's one of those things that kind of launched his rising as a celebrity, as a record executive, as the owner of a label. And, the end of the documentary just kind of pushes towards, him in, the hotel room again, before he gets arrested, and, him just kind of, thinking, I'm in a bad situation. How do I get out of this? What do I need to do to get myself out of this mess that I got myself into? And it's a theme that seems to continue. And I watched the entire episode. How did you feel about it as kind of the introduction into a 4-part series like this?
I actually thought it was really good. I mean, I think I'd heard that it was kind of slow or not as, but I mean, the first episode was pretty good. It was a good, like I said, the background, like I said, of his childhood, leading up to, getting to Uptown, and then just you kind of see a pattern of him becoming who he is when he reached the pinnacle of his career. So, everything made sense. I mean, they tried to lay it out to say, hey, here's a background, like I said, here's how he grew up. This could have influenced him. This could have not influenced him. This is kind of why he is what he is. They kind of gave you that vision of saying, okay, I can see how he did this, or I can see this. But you got that little dose into, like you said, the music industry of him with Jodeci, Mary J. Blige, and then a small taste of like the Biggie, But
it was really riveting stuff, and I enjoyed it myself at the end. I thought that it did start off really slow. About halfway through, I'm like, you know what, man, I don't know if this is for me. And then it started to pick up some steam and started to reveal some things that the nostalgia helps, man. Got to be honest. When you're playing those hits, when you're playing Jodeci standing around outside in front of a recording studio singing a cappella, it takes me back to a certain place in time where it's like, you know what, I think I'm going to stick around for another 5 minutes. And then it gets more interesting. So it did have a slow lead up, but I'm glad that I stuck it out and finished all of episode 1.
I want to hit on some other stuff real quick. And like I said, do this however you want. So, we talk about 50 Cent, and he may have a little bit of a bias,
bias.
Yeah,
yes.
He may have a grudge with Diddy for whatever reasons, But I'll give him credit. a couple things though. And just to go through the episode again, I think some of that backstory, and again, I don't use it as an excuse, but I think it showed, again, this could have affected Puff Daddy as a kid to made him, again, the man who he became. And then it touched on a lot of stuff in that first episode to, again, you're trying to get a backstory, but also, okay, I can see how he became this type of music mogul, right? I can see how he became this person or had this personality, all these things. And that even goes to the video girl who accused him of sexual assault, right?
Correct.
So that leads into all the stuff he's dealing with now, right? That he videoed her and then played it for people at parties, or
Yes.
beating his baby mama on the street.
Yeah.
And then, so then it's like, okay, so then your mind goes to that video of Cassie, right? So they
Yes.
plugged in a lot of stuff in the first episode, and I know we didn't even really touch on those two things. Was, again, that kind of said, oh, well, yeah, he's doing this, he's a hard worker, and I could see how he did this, but then he also had this moment. Like, as bad as that concert, the basketball game was with the 9 deaths, and then you're also like, okay, there's this sexual assault. There he is beating a woman.
Yes.
What even like hit his mama, right? So
Yeah. Hold on. And just to be clear, that's an allegation.
it is an allegation.
That he hit his mom.
Right.
And
Again, all this is
it's an allegation, and after the tragedy with CCNY,
Uh-huh.
so after the deaths, he's the story is told that he's having a discussion with his mom, and she's asking him, "Hey, like, are you sure this is a direction that you want to go into?
Yeah.
Like, look at what just happened. Look at the end results of this." And as a reaction to her asking him that the allegation is that he allegedly put hands on his own mother.
Yeah.
So, but it's also like you said, where it's that shows the fervor. If something like that is true, it shows that that's the tenacity that he has, to where this is what he wants so bad. And even if it results in him hurting his own mother physically, that's the lengths that he's willing to go to. Again, it was a blip in the documentary. It was mentioned and then they moved on. But like you said, it did surface with other sexual assault allegations, and then hotel footage of him literally dragging Cassie through a hotel, hallway. So, wearing a towel, by the way. So, so just to kind of add the full context.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think 50 actually did him a really good service of telling a full story, which is what I want in a good documentary. Don't make it so secular to where you're just bad guy.
Yeah.
He painted a picture and a portrait, but ultimately it's 50. He still wants him to look bad. He still wants Puff to look bad.
Well, yeah, but at the end of the day, I think that is true. But again, I think you said he did do him a solid to say maybe this is why he is what he is, right?
With no excuses. That's not a justification.
No.
Things are what they are.
No, but with everybody in life, everything that happens, everything
Correct.
you go for molds you into the person. Ultimately, though, you make the decision how you want to be.
Yep. And much like how you make the decision how you want to be, how you want to behave, how you want to treat people, you have to live with the results, which is what Diddy's doing right now. He's having to face the music, even though he was trying his hardest with his attorneys to try to get out of it. Clearly didn't work out in his favor.
No, and unfortunately for him, Johnny Cochran is no longer alive.
He is not. Johnny Cochran is not there.
He helped him before.
And again, it's Diddy. He did. Well, here's the thing. Like I said, it's Diddy. It's hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. I'm pretty sure the best people available he was able to hire. Which goes right back to, I think
they ain't Johnny Cochran.
Yeah, maybe he wanted, the glove doesn't fit type of moment. Not for him, man. It's not gonna happen.
Nah, not this time. All right, that's another episode of Fanatically Speaking. I am Kent, co-host and promoter.
I am Logoff, the Logoff legend, hater of social media. I'm the co-host and producer of the show. So that was our kind of recap. Episode 1, Sean Combs' The Reckoning. And we're going to go and do an episode 2. We've already watched it, so we'll do an episode 2 that will be out shortly after this episode comes out. But same thing, every episode we tell you guys, like, share, review, post, comment, reach out to us, let us know what you think. I'm pretty sure that there's some things that maybe we missed, but it's a lot. We didn't want to kind of bore you guys with with a lot of the detail, but there's a lot of interesting things that came out in that episode, and we wanted to record something to talk about it. Kent, you got anything?
No, I'm out. Like I said, this is it falls under our umbrella of pop culture for being a fan.
Yeah, pop culture, and again, this is our era, man. I mean,
Yes.
this is the era of music and hip hop that I know best, and so this was something that that record label as a whole, played a huge part of my childhood, and unfortunately, it had to surface in a documentary like this with horrible things taking place, but it happened. And, I'm just glad to be able to watch it as a form of entertainment and, be able to speak and, throw some words on there about it. But yeah, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, follow us, like, share, review. And yeah, man, that's all I got.
That's it.